What the death of Socrates still teaches us about living well. Today, we will watch a man die. Chapter 1. Who was Socrates? What if death isn't the enemy we most fear, but the teacher we most need? Today, you will step into the prison cell of Socrates and discover how his final moments can still set you free. Socrates lived in Athens 2,400 years ago. He was not wealthy, nor powerful, nor beautiful, yet he became the wisest person of his age, not because he claimed more knowledge, but because he admitted more ignorance. In pursuit of truth, he challenged commonly accepted beliefs and ideas most people relied on to make everyday decisions, and he taught and encouraged others to think for themselves and do the same. The men of Athens did not thank him. Instead, they arrested and charged Socrates with corrupting youth. At the age of 70, he was sentenced to death. On his final day of life, Socrates' friends gathered around him in prison. What they expected was despair. What they witnessed was wisdom, courage, integrity, and even humor. He once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." In his last hours, Socrates examined life and death more deeply than anyone before or since. Socrates' death is not just a historical moment, but the death that awaits us all. Socrates' end is not just his, but ours. Socrates' words aren't just for his friends. He meant them for us too. This happened long ago, but it speaks directly to us today. What happened then matters now. The death of Socrates is not just a sad story from ancient Greece. It is not just Socrates' death. It is every death, a story for all time. It is about us, you and me, here and now. This was the death of Socrates. Socrates' death grabs us by the wrist and pulls us out of captivity and into freedom. It is a mirror in which we face ourselves and face our greatest fear. His courage in the shadow of death is not about ancient history. His final hours challenge us to reflect on our own struggle with mortality and question what it means to be free. The true freedom that only comes when we realize that nothing can harm us, not even death. When we realize we cannot get enough of what we don't really want, the shadow of death becomes a liberation from the tyranny of insatiable desires and perpetual suffering. When we realize that we have the power to live fearlessly and have life more abundantly. Socrates was more than just a wise person. He was a teacher, a troublemaker, and a rebel. He was a teacher of truth in a world that often preferred comfortable lies. He was a troublemaker for urging young people to think for themselves. He was a rebel who preferred freedom to think, with the risk of disorder rather than conformity without freedom. For refusing to abandon his principles, the men of Athens voted to condemn Socrates to death. The vote was 280 to 220. Socrates' death led to political turmoil and a decline in trust toward the democratic process in Athens. Yet, in his death, Socrates teaches his greatest lesson. He teaches us how to accept our own mortality, face our own end, and overcome our greatest fear with courage, dignity, and even a sense of humor. For once we conquer our fear of death, our lesser fears lose their power and hold over us. Our captivity is ended, and we become truly free. Once we stop fearing death, we overcome the tyranny of our lesser fears. Rejection, regret, poverty, disapproval, shame, failure, guilt, loss, grief. All of our lesser fears dissolve, and we find freedom, a total, absolute freedom, wider and deeper than we have ever known. Death, where is thy sting? Why do we cling to youth and claw at life? Death is the great equalizer. Socrates' wisdom, courage, and dignity in death connect us with our own modern confrontation with mortality. Socrates' last day of life teaches us that we have the power to die without fear, and so too we have the power to live without fear. Chapter 2, The Prison. On the last day of his life, Socrates sat in his prison cell, surrounded by his friends. They were anxious, afraid, broken by sorrow, but Socrates himself was calm. He listened with kindness, but refused to grieve. Gathered around him were his close friends, Phaedo, Crito, Cebes, Simmias, Apollodorus, and others. Plato, his closest friend, was not present at Socrates' death. He was ill. Plato wrote of Socrates' final moments, relying on accounts from others who were present. The air was saturated with despair. The walls were cold stone, the light dim, the silence broken only by the sobbing of those who loved him. Their grief made the small space feel heavy, suffocating. Some covered their faces, unable to watch. Others were clinging to his hands and feet as though they could keep him here by sheer force of love. They begged Socrates to escape prison and flee Athens. Crito bribed his guards to look the other way. But Socrates would not betray his principles and refused to run away. They wept at the thought of his absence from their lives, but Socrates answered their tears with wisdom. He said, "Death is not the end, but a beginning. Our captivity is over." Xanthippe, his wife, was brought in with their 3 children. Xanthippe, overcome with grief, cried out, "Socrates, you are about to leave your wife and 3 sons." With gentle humor, he replied, "Would you prefer I die an old man, leaving you still to weep?" Even in that dark moment, he lifted grief with wit. Again, Xanthippe cried out, "Socrates, this is the last time your friends will ever speak with you." With tenderness but firmness, Socrates asked that she be taken away, not because he didn't love her, but because her grief, though natural, would frustrate the calm he wished to gift his friends, and drown out the wisdom he still had to share. Even now his mind was fixed on the pursuit of wisdom and not on the shadow of death. The moment was painful, yet also strangely humorous. Even at the threshold of death, Socrates was the same man, direct, practical, and uncompromising. To his friends, death felt like a thief in the room. But to Socrates, it was a companion. He spoke calmly, his voice steady. To fear death, my friends, is nothing other than to think oneself wise when one is not. For no one knows whether death may not be the greatest of all blessings for a man. Their faces pressed against their hands, and in their center, the serene face of a man who would not let death steal his courage and contentment. Chapter 3. The Philosophy of Death. The room grew quiet and still as Socrates began to speak, his calm voice filling the prison cell. His friends leaned in, desperate to hear each word, as though his words might deliver them from their grief. Socrates explained why living for the wise is essentially a training for dying. We struggle to detach from our bodily desires and focus on the life of the mind. Death is not to be feared, but understood and embraced. For what is death but a release, the separation of the soul from the body? Not a loss, but a passage, not a defeat, but the moment when the soul sheds its prison of flesh. To fear this is to fear the very thing that makes us free, said Socrates. And is that not what the wise have always sought? To free the soul from the distractions and deceptions of the body, from hunger, desire, vanity, and suffering. The truly wise, he said, practice dying every day. To live in wisdom means to prepare for death. Socrates said, death should not terrify or even disturb us. If death is nothing more than endless sleep, then it is a gift. Who among us, he asked, has not longed after a weary day for the comfort of rest? For what could be more peaceful than a night of deep, dreamless rest? Socrates asked them to imagine one perfect night of such sleep. Now, he said, stretch it to eternity. Where is the harm in that? But, said Socrates, if life comes from death, just as waking comes from sleep, then death is not sleep, but a passage, and better still, for the soul may journey to another place where one might meet with the great souls who have gone before, heroes, poets, and thinkers of the past. The soul simply returns to the place it was before birth. Socrates smiled as he spoke of meeting and conversing with the legendary musician Orpheus and the epic storyteller Homer, all those who dedicated their lives to truth and beauty. What greater blessing could there be, said Socrates, than to test their wisdom and learn what truths they discovered? He said, and if we cannot know what lies beyond, then death must lead either to nothing or to something. In either case, death is not to be feared. If nothing, then we will find eternal peace. If something, then we will experience a higher state of being, and death will be an adventure of discovery. Both, he said, are gifts. Around him, his friends wept, but Socrates was undisturbed. His words were not only an invitation to embrace death, but a philosophy of life. Socrates was the living embodiment of the very fearlessness he spoke of, and his serenity was the proof. Chapter 4. The Final Conversation. Time drifted slowly in the dim prison. Outside, Athens was alive with noise. But in Socrates' prison cell, the world seemed suspended between life and death. Socrates spoke, weaving threads of wisdom, comfort, and even laughter into the tapestry of his last day of life. As the end grew near, Crito, his dear friend, nervously asked, Socrates, do you have any final instructions for us about your burial? Socrates laughed. Bury me? You can bury me however you like, if you can catch me. His friends laughed too, through their tears, for Socrates' joke carried a sharp truth. Socrates is not the body they will soon see lying still. Socrates' true self is the soul, and that will not remain in the prison cell when life departs. Then came one last joke. Socrates recalled an old vow. Crito, we owe a cock to Asclepius. See that it is paid. The god of healing must be honored, for death itself is the cure for the sickness of life. Socrates, in the shadow of death, still funny and profound. Yet, behind his humor was his greatest teaching. To fear death is to remain enslaved for all one's life. Face death with courage and serenity and every lesser fear. Fear of poverty, of shame, of guilt, of failure, even fear of other people's disapproval and rejection loses its power over us. To conquer the greatest fear is, then, to live freely, fully, and joyfully. His friends sat in silence, torn between grief and wonder. They came expecting to mourn. They found themselves instead at the edge of death, confronted with courage, wisdom, and laughter. Chapter 5. The moment of death. The moment had come. The heavy door opened. A guard entered, holding the cup of poison hemlock. His hands trembled, his eyes turned away. Socrates smiled and took the cup into his own hands. No man escapes this cup. No woman passes it by. It waits for each of us in silence, in certainty. It is the one appointment no human being will ever miss. Death belongs to each of us, but how we meet it, that is ours to decide, wrote Plato. The room grew still. Even the air was waiting. The guard had delivered this drink before, but never to a man like Socrates. He offered an apology. You are the noblest, gentlest, and best of all men who ever came here. You will not be angry with me. It is not I, but the law that compels you. Socrates accepted the cup without hesitation. Not a flicker of fear crossed his face. He looked at the liquid as though it was no more than a cup of medicine to heal a fever. Without ceremony, without pause, he lifted the cup to his lips and drank it down in one swallow. No bitterness touched his face. He had spoken of the soul, of its journey beyond this life. To his friends, he offered comfort. To us, he offers courage, wrote Plato. Lying down, Socrates drew a cloak over himself, as if ready for sleep. His last words were a reminder to offer a gift to Asclepius. Credo, do not forget. Remember the rooster. His friends burst into tears. Their grief is our grief. We are born knowing only life. We fear death because it ends what we know. We fear because death separates us from life, familiar and comfortable. We fear because death is strange and unknowable. Unable to hold back their unbearable grief and anguish, Socrates scolded his friends. "What is this strange outcry? I sent the woman away to avoid such unseemly behavior. Be still and keep your courage." What makes Socrates different from his friends? What makes him so different from us? It's not the cup, it's the courage to drink it. Socrates' death teaches that death itself is not to be feared. What truly matters is the courage to meet it. The guard turned away in sorrow. Socrates drank in freedom. Socrates walked a few steps, then lay down, so the poison may work evenly. The guard knelt beside him, testing the numbness that began in his feet. He pinched his legs. Socrates felt nothing. The poison crept upward, slowly and relentlessly. Plato wrote, "The body began to dim, like a lantern turned low. Sensation retreated from his feet upward. His friends measured the distance to the end by touch. Socrates measured it by calm." Remember the rooster. His friends heard a riddle. Socrates meant a remedy. Life, with its fears and frets, paid in full. The poison, not an injury, but a release. Death, not a judge, but a teacher. Even now, Socrates was teaching. The end of fear arrives before the end of breath. Socrates lay back, arranged his cloak as one arranges a thought. The rooster, a little joke about being cured. Not cured of living, but cured of fearing to live. Cured of clinging to what must be given back. Socrates met the final moment with the manners of a guest returning a cup. His friends came undone. Some hid their faces, others wept openly. Yet Socrates remained serene. His breath grew slower, but his eyes were clear. His body stiffened as the numbness reached his chest. A final breath escaped. His face softened, not into agony, but into tranquility. It was as if peace had claimed him. Plato wrote, "Such was the end of our friend. Of all the men of his time whom we have known, he was the wisest and justest and best." In that silent moment, death lost its terror. What had seemed the greatest fear became an infinite ocean of liberation. Too late, his friends see the truth. Socrates did not die in the darkness of despair, but in the light of freedom. Chapter 6. The meaning of his death. The death of Socrates was not the closing of a life, but the opening of a truth. It was Socrates' final lesson to his friends and to each of us. Almost from the moment of birth, we carry the fear of death. It lurks behind our daily trials and anxieties, shaping our thoughts, feelings, and actions in ways we do not always see. But Socrates shows us something extraordinary. When our greatest fear, the fear of death itself, is understood and accepted as simply the other half of life, all of our lesser fears lose their hold and power over us. And we experience a total and absolute freedom that is wider and deeper than we have ever known. True freedom comes when nothing can enslave us, not even death. Death gives weight to life. Living fully means living fearlessly. What is the sting of failure compared to death? What is the pain of embarrassment, the anxiety of change, the shame of disapproval, or the grief of loss? Where is thy sting after death itself has been stripped of its terror? Socrates' death teaches the individual who does not fear death cannot be enslaved by any other fear. We are now free to live boldly, truthfully, and above all, fearlessly. His friends, blinded by grief, believed his death was a prison. But in truth, Socrates was the freest person in Athens that day. The prison held only his body, not his spirit. Plato, remembering this moment, has Socrates say, "The one aim of those who practice philosophy in the proper manner is to practice for dying and death. The pursuit of wisdom is not an escape from life. It is preparation to embrace death without fear, so that every moment may be lived more fully and life itself may be more abundant." Death, for Socrates, was not destruction, but healing. Asclepius healed the sick. For Socrates, death is the ultimate healing, the release from the illness of mortal life and the liberation of the soul. Death is not a wound, but a remedy. His friends wept, but Socrates smiled. He had passed from captivity into freedom. Meeting death fearlessly, Socrates gave his friends and us the greatest gift: to free ourselves from the terror of the end of life is to free ourselves for life. Every heartbeat becomes precious. Every choice becomes ours. And Chapter 7, Timeless Relevance. This is the end. We are all waiting in that prison cell. One day, the guard will come for us. One day, the cup will be placed in our hands. What will you do then? Tremble with fear or drink without hesitation, as Socrates did? Which shall it be? Socrates' death is not simply an ancient event. It is a mirror for all time. One day, every one of us will face the last sunrise. The big question is not how we will die, but how we will live to meet it. In the modern world, why have we figured out everything except how to live and die? From Socrates, we learn that courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. Facing our greatest fear, death itself, we overcome the lesser fears that dominate our daily life. Fear of failure, of shame, of poverty, of guilt, of rejection. What once loomed so large now shrinks to insignificance. His friends fail to see it at first. They wept, they pleaded, they feared. But the truth of his courage, serenity, and humor is timeless. Socrates teaches, life is not shortened by death, but lengthened by courage. Each moment gains weight, each choice significance. Once we embrace what is inevitable. As he said in his final hours, death may be the greatest of all human blessings. And as we witness his calm, his clarity, his laughter, we understand what he meant. The fear that enslaves us falls away. Life becomes richer, fuller, freer. Even now in our modern world, Socrates' courage is ours to possess. His serenity is ours to aspire to. His humor is proof that even in our darkest moments, life can be met with wit, joy, and grace. Embracing death means embracing life, aware present and alive. Every heartbeat counts. Every moment is precious. Every choice is ours to make. His death teaches us that in the grand scheme of things, there isn't one. We are free. It's all up to us. Socrates is the way. We listen because his wisdom has light. We grieve because his love has weight. Socrates passed as he had lived, in freedom and in truth. Just as his death will one day be our death, his freedom can be ours today. Not by claiming victory over death, but by refusing to be its prisoner. Like Socrates, we cannot choose when death will come, but we can choose how to meet it, with courage, with wisdom, and with a sense of humor. In that choice lies your freedom to live more fully and more abundantly than ever before. Fear not, my friend. Today, you watched a man die so that you might live fearlessly.